After months of hype and a pandemic that slowed everything down, and now here we are again, Ten of Swords has finally come to pass. We have Ten of Swords creation, part 1 of 22. But really, if you did not read X-Men and Excalibur a week ago, you're going to be confused. So if you haven't done that, go back and read those. This will be a spoiler-filled review. So if you haven't read the issue yet, if you don't want to be spoiled, stop watching. Otherwise, we'll be back right after the break. Hey everybody, this is Perch, and hey, if you are new to the channel and you haven't subscribed yet, please throw up a subscription there. Why not? What could it hurt in the grand scheme of things? It's good. Otherwise, like, dislike if you hate the content, whatever you feel like doing. As I mentioned before, this is a spoiler review of Ten of Swords Creation, which is the first-ish issue of the newest event from Marvel. This is an X-Men event. And it's by Jonathan Hickman and Tini Howard. Both had, at least from what we've heard about the origins of this, both had stories that they were wanting to tell. And they came to the conclusion it was better to tell the story together. And so that's kind of what we have here. They're the co-writers for this event. Pete Larraz, of course, from the launch of this new X-Men era, is back on art duties. It's a very pretty issue, lots of good art, lots of good coloring, lots of good stuff here. But let's, how is the story itself? Well, to give you some context, first off, as I mentioned before the jump, we have, if you haven't been reading along in X-Men, there's a lot of story beats there around Krakoa and how it was cleaved in half at one point. And there's this other world, and Apocalypse has been wanting to get back there. And there's this character, the Summoner, who's Apocalypse's grandchild. And just there's a lot of bits there that if you haven't been following along, you're going to be confused. In addition, there's probably even more that if you haven't been following along closely to Excalibur, and actually even going further than that, a while back, a couple weeks ago, I think, Marvel published a Captain Britain issue that really went into Satyrine and Otherworld, the Starlight Citadel, a lot of these things that were old Alan Davis stories, some Chris Claremont, and Tini Howard's been taking beats of this, as well as telling the story. It is Excalibur, but really it's Apocalypse's book in a lot of ways. Apocalypse is at the forefront of that title. So things he's doing with Richter, kind of the gate he made in the most recent issue, connecting the two lands. There's a lot there. So if you haven't been following along with Excalibur and you don't know anything about Satyrine and Otherworld, you're going to want to go on YouTube. You're going to want to check out some videos that are trying to summarize Satyrine and Otherworld and Captain Britain and some of that stuff if you truly want to enjoy this issue. Otherwise, most of it's going to fly over your head while you kind of page through it looking for the action bits. At any rate, our comic opens and we are right there in a siege of Otherworld. The army of the original 4 horsemen from Apocalypse are commanding a kind of giant group of I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, Arachno. We'll get to it. Army of monsters, and they are about to storm the Citadel, and they're marching to Krakoa. Their goal is to reunite the lands and dominate them. There was an old war. I think this was X-Men number 2, if I'm mistaken, where last year, that talked about how Krakoa is one half of one unified land, and there was a big kind of monster invasion that took place, and Apocalypse wound up cleaving the land in half with a Twilight Sword, and that got us to where we are. So this is this army. Apocalypse's original 4 horsemen have switched sides and joined the invading forces, joined the enemy, of which we haven't completely met. But at any rate, basically the tower. The final kind of tower before we get to the Starlight Citadel, Arakko, there we go. Arakko has fallen, the tower has fallen, word is being given to Satyrine that this has occurred, and she immediately goes for the tarot deck to kind of read the future and try and understand what is going on. So she sends her mage and some members of her court to go read the cards to retrieve this kind of magical element that is going to kind of explain or at least fortune tell what's going to happen. And then we get a repeat of the free comic book day moments of Saturn reading the cards of the Judgment, the Four of Wands, the Hangman, the Eight of Cups, and the Ten of Swords. There's at least enough indication here that they say in the issue, not jumping ahead, that Apocalypse's wife has perished, but it seems more likely that she fell to this monstrous kind of nightmare that from Akaro, and that is that she's going to be the big villain or a big villain coming into all this, kind of Apocalypse's wife Genesis. So this comic then proceeds to kind of hop back and forth between spots. So we are back on Krakoa and basically emerging from this gate that Apocalypse built. He built this permanent gate between Akaro, Otherworld, and Krakoa that is always open, and that people in addition to mutants can come through it. And Summoner, his grandchild, comes through with a fatally wounded Banshee. And they are and basically saying he's dying. We were ambushed. Bad stuff's happening. You need to. We need help. Akaro's fallen, and it's clearly a trap. But this leads us to the Quiet Council, and Apocalypse is explaining that he built this gate. The rest of the Quiet Council is kind of pissed about this because he didn't get permission. Apocalypse saying, yeah, we get some parliamentary kind of back and forth, and we hear that Krakoa is kind of pissy about this whole thing. Krakoa, the island, wants this land unified, and so Apocalypse and Summoner kind of tell the story with Summoner saying we were ambushed. They captured Eunice the Untouchable. They fatally wounded Banshee. We've got to go and lead a mission, kind of back through. Apocalypse saying he needs to go through. There's a little bit in here from Kitty Pryde talking about how she hasn't gone through the gates yet, which, is there's little ties to the other comics that are going on. I do appreciate this kind of 2-panel mention where Nightcrawler is recapping that, they've got a bunch of new enemies, Hominis Verende, the Flower Cartel, Xeno, Orcus. They don't mention the horticulture folks, but oh well. At any rate, the Quiet Council wants to destroy the gate. But Krakoa says, absolutely not. You're guests on my land, and you will not destroy this gate. Magneto is again pissed that Apocalypse went off and did this thing on his own. And so Apocalypse gathers a group that's going to go through and see what's going on and rescue Eunice the Untouchable and spin off this threat. And so they gather basically Polaris and Havoc, as well as Siren and the Beast, and Archangel and Richter, Rockslide. And so they all go through, and Monet, they all go through the gate, and we immediately, meanwhile, actually, before they get there, Rachel and Cable are like, hey, before we commit a bunch of our people to what could potentially be a bad suicide mission and a bunch of craziness, maybe we should dig into Banshee's old mind here and just make sure that no shenanigans are in place. Maybe you should have done that a few minutes earlier before this group went through the gate, but hey, mutants are not good planners, I guess. So we get some nice back and forth with Archangel. There's a couple beats in this story that are really nice, of nods to X-Men past, and I do appreciate that. The dialogue between Apocalypse and Archangel, and kind of that dynamic a little bit between Havoc and Polaris. This comic still feels awkward in terms of some of the other things going on in Dawn of X, some of what they've been doing with Beast and X-Force or in Hellions. And so I do object a little bit. And we hear a lot about how the X-Men writers are using really tight continuity. They're meeting weekly. They're all talking together with their ideas. It's not reading that way. If that's what you think you're doing, it doesn't quite come across to the readers. There's still questions about when some of this stuff takes place. It's not as connected as you think. Now, to be fair, I don't think most people would care. But when you say over and over, hey, we're spending all this time making sure everything connects and fits really nicely together, and then it doesn't, then you're almost begging people to come in and prove how it's not. So if you just said nothing, most people would not care. I'm just a little bit of advice, kind of right out there. Anyway, Apocalypse gets over. He finds Eunice. He sees his horsemen. He's tearful because he left them behind, and he goes to greet them. Meanwhile, Rachel and Kid Cable are digging around in his mind, and they realize that, hey, this summoner guy may have been lying to us all this time, and he actually ambushed Banshee and Eunice themselves as a setup. And sure enough, meanwhile, the horsemen who greet Apocalypse, they have some words together, and they proceed to stab him through the heart, where the summoner, uses some little knife blades to, poke him in the back. And they immediately get jumped, combined with, the summoner kind of goes to his new buddy Rockslide and cuts him in half. And so there's just some people getting chopped up, and Richter gets shot by an arrow, and it's just a complete ambush. It's a second ambush is basically what we get. So as they're fighting, Satyrine is like looking down on all this from the Golden Tower. And, Monet is kind of pissed about this and says, hey, why don't you get your ass down here and actually help out? But Satyrine's not having any of it. And Havoc's like, hey, that giant Starlight Citadel is made out of metal, Polaris, so why don't you just, F up that house, lower those property values, and she does. Meanwhile, back in Krakoa, well, sort of the moon, Kid Cable heads up to go check out, Cyclops and Jean, who are having some nice coffee, some post-coital coffee. Wolverine's nowhere to be found. And he's like, hey, there's an ambush, it's a problem, there's the big mess. And then Satyrine pointed out that we needed to get something. She showed us something that we need to go retrieve. If you want to win, then you'll need this thing. And she showed us this ball, basically. And Jean doesn't know what it is, but old Cyclops does. And this is a throwback to the astonishing X-Men that we're going to find out in a moment. So, meanwhile, back in Araco, I'm not gonna. It's just that doesn't roll off the tongue. They are battling away. And they're having a good old-fashioned fight. Satyrine comes down and just stops the whole fight. She freezes everyone, which begs the question: why doesn't if these people are coming to kind of charge into her citadel and she could just freeze all of them in place? Maybe she could just she seems quite powerful here. So the threat is a little bit confusing. But anyway, what I'm assuming is Death of the Four Horsemen comes in and it's like, I'm gonna F you up. But Satyrine uses the old mojo power and turns into Four Horsemen babies. So she turns, I think this is Death of the Four Horsemen. She turns him into, it may have been War, actually, come to think of it. Anyway, she turns him into a kid or like a little small creature and says, hey, you're not going to just F up my house. And he's like, well, we'll meet in an arena. He basically challenges to a good old-fashioned duel. And then she turns to Polaris, and Polaris is like, and Havoc, and like, yeah, we'll do it too. Let's have ourselves a good old-fashioned fight. And Satyrine agrees to those terms, and we're setting the rules of engagement. Meanwhile, in some mysterious kind of techno-metal place, Cyclops and Jean are kind of checking out a giant ball, and Kid Cable's like, we need to power up Cyclops like, we need to power up this ball, and Kid Cable's like, I'll stick my glowing sword into it. That always works. And so he prepares to do that. And he does, and it establishes the core, establishes the bridge, gets things all powered up. It's like they're turning on the car. So meanwhile, back in Otherworld and Akaro on the battlefield, Polaris and what we're assuming is Famine here list off the 10 swords. 10 swords for each team. The team Four Horsemen, Akaro, the monsters, and Team Mutants of Krakoa. And they are each going to get 10 swords, and in 3 days' time, they're going to come to the battlefield. They're going to gather the champions. Rivals will be lost. Alliances will be shattered. Fortunes to be gained. It's Contest of Champions for X-Men. Well, no, not really, but it is a battle of swords, 10 combatants on each side fighting it out. You're fighting for your enemy who wants your annihilation, so you must annihilate your enemy. It's kill or be killed. And then, you raise your sword and you fight. It's a good old-fashioned tournament contest. And meanwhile, we learn that the big ball that we turned on, that Kid Cable turned on with his sword, is also a sword. In this case, it's the giant, space station of S.W.O.R.D that was run by Abigail Brand. We first saw it back um, in Astonishing X-Men, the Joss Whedon run, and we recently saw, of course, Abigail Brand in Empire in the post-conclusion of her quitting, running Alpha Flight with Captain Marvel, and we also know, if you saw the video last night, that we have a brand new X title on the way called S.W.O.R.D, and that's by Al Ewing, and he's joining our X-Men troop for S.W.O.R.D with Magneto and Abigail Brand and Banshee, and so spoilers, he'll be okay in the future. At any rate, that comic is coming. S.W.O.R.D, this is apparently how S.W.O.R.D is going to be introduced, and kind of this concept. So mutants heading off to space. And that's the issue. So basically, we've got a bunch of things going on. We have one issue next week, kind of awkward. We have X Factor number 4, which is not the most critical prime X-Men book, but that's the book that's going to follow up this one. And then the following week, we get Wolverine, X-Force, and the Marauders. The week after that, we get Hellions, New Mutants, and Cable. And the week after that, we get Excalibur and X-Men. And then finally, X of Swords, Ten of Swords, Stasis number 1, which is chapter 11. So a lot of stuff. We're gathering up the swords. We're gathering up the combatants. We're going to see who those are. I mean, we know several of them. We know, from the promo art, Doug Ramsey, Magic. We've got, we can kind of tell who some of these people are. It looks like Charles Xavier is going to wield one of the swords. Wolverine, of course. So we got a battle. This is a battle that is taking place. So in terms of some final thoughts, it is, and it's a beautiful looking book. Absolutely, the art is incredible. The book is interesting because it kind of simultaneously is very dense with a lot of continuity and history. And like I mentioned at the very beginning, if you're not reading a lot of other things, you're going to be lost, and that's your mind's just going to kind of float over some of this stuff unless you're really kind of deeply embedded. The book does lean into Saturine and kind of the tarot and some of these elements, almost a little bit. I mean, well, if you like it, then you're probably a very happy camper. If not, it tends to kind of beat you over the head after a while. But at its core, I mean, it's a battle book. It's the mutants versus the original 4 horsemen and a bunch of monsters, and it's that's what we're in for. We're in for kind of 2 sides, and they're going to have a fight, and then one will win, and it will be the X-Men. But it will. It's interesting. The piece that is I suspect, of course we don't know, is that the resurrection protocols may not work if they are killed over in this other world or something. I don't know. There's supposed to be a big twist in how the resurrection protocols work that adds some more weight to all of this. Because if you think about it, if the mutants can just come back to life whenever they want, they can just be resurrected and death doesn't matter, then the idea of having kind of your Tim Champions fight, it also doesn't matter. But on Akaro also, the monsters can be resurrected as well, apparently. So nobody dies. So it can be the endless war that can take place. But anyway, I think in terms of, you're an X-Men fan, there is promising to be enough here that will probably entertain you as a good X-Men book with some classic fights between characters. It is. It does require, I mean, I think the big lie here is that Marvel has said, you don't have to read all the titles. You clearly have to read most of the titles. So again, if you're loving the books, no problem. If you were hoping to just kind of step into it and read a couple and get a comic, then that's not going to work. So there's probably other comics for you. All in all, it's okay. The pacing's a little wonky at times, but it's the start to a new series. I keep saying start-ish. I think that X-Men and Excalibur last week were clearly important to this series. So I think that was clearly the number 1 and the number 2. Having this be the number 1 is a little disingenuous. If they ever collect this in trade, they're going to have to include those books because it will make very little sense if they don't. But anyway, what do you think? Did you read this book? Are you interested in this book? Leave your comments below. If you are a big fan of House of X, Powers of 10, there's certainly elements of that storytelling you see here, kind of big stakes and everything else. You certainly see that. So, that's worth a pickup, and, you might get what you look for. Otherwise, there's a lot of events and things going around the Marvel universe. So if you skip it, you're not going to, miss the world. It's not must read, but it looks like a fun little X-Men story that will have a lot of dense, moments here and there, and some fights with swords. So if that's your game, then go pick it up. X-Men Creation, number 1, kicking off Ten of Swords. A lot of things to say in there. Anyway, let me know what you think. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, follow me on social media, or send me an email. And most importantly, thanks for listening.